was born in Cuba, and my parents were fresh out of school, basically. My father is an architect, and my mother was working in pharmaceuticals for a short time. And then my father decided to come to America because he wanted a better life, like so many other immigrants. And so in 1958, when I was a year old, we came to America, and we settled in New York with my grandmother. My grandmother was American, my mother's mother was American, and she sponsored us. So the four of us were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens until I was 5. Actually, my sister was born there too, so there were 5 of us in that little apartment. So we moved to California when my father got a job there, and they're still living out there. You know, my interest in music is very unusual. My parents listened to a lot of music on the radio. They played a lot of music in the house. There was always, a stereo was always going. My father in particular, I think he fancied himself a conductor. He'd walk around the house conducting the Rite of Spring, or he'd put on the Vivaldi Four Seasons as loud as it could be. And well, I was exposed to it at an early age. And but oddly enough, there was no real connection to playing at that point. A teacher came to school and said, "We're going to start a music program here, and if you want to play an instrument, come to the meeting with your parents." And it just so happens that just before that, in 1967, when I was 10, a recording came out of Victor Tretiakov playing the Paganini First Violin Concerto, and my father bought it and played it, and I said to my dad, "Listen to all those violin players." My dad said, "That's one guy." And that was the moment where I thought, I want to do this. And so I went to the public school meeting, and from the moment I walked in, I knew my life's work was going to be playing the violin. It just was completely out of my hands. It was not really a decision. I walked in there already knowing that that is exactly what I was going to do. And I knew I was going to do it the rest of my life. I can't explain it. It's just one of those things. It's like, you know, one of those things where people say it's either some kind of divine intervention or some force at work, and that's exactly what it was. And I've never looked back for a minute since I began. After I started in the public school program, miraculously, I did the 2-year program in about 4 months, and my public school teacher just said, "Oh boy, we need to get him a private teacher." And very luckily, I was in touch with this fabulous Italian man named Salvatore Crimi. He was a studio musician, and being Italian, he had a personality of, you know, passion, and he played beautifully. And so my lessons began with him always playing for me. And he had a beautiful sound, beautiful glissandi, and I fell in love with his playing, and I immediately wanted to do everything he did, and so it took very little time for me to start gravitating towards that kind of playing. He gave me, you know, some exercises and things to get started, and it was a very successful union for about 2 or 3 years. And then he went away on sabbatical. My next teacher was his ex-wife, who was a very technically oriented woman. And my parents made the decision to switch because they felt that technically I wasn't getting as much as I needed. And of course I resisted this horribly because I loved my teacher. But she did a lot of good things for me. And finally I had a number of teachers after that, quite a number, maybe 6 or 7 teachers. And finally, when I went to Indiana University, then I found Mr. Gingold, of course, and Josef Gingold was really not only my teacher and my mentor, but he was everything to me. He is the man who really guided me to where I am today. He instilled in me a tremendous sense of responsibility, accountability, artistry, being tough as an artist, expecting a lot from oneself, and he did it all very kindly and very supported, in a very supporting manner, and we became very, very close. He became like another father to me, and we remained very, very close until his death 20 years ago. So I really credit him for getting me past the point, you know, there's always a point where you have talent, or you have facility, or you have some kind of ability. And then you get to this plateau area where you could either remain there for a long time, and that is where you end up, or somebody pushes you past that threshold. And Mr. Gingold challenged me to constantly go beyond that, and that is where my success came from, really, is his vision and his guidance in trying to get me way beyond what I was comfortable with. And I think that's where I owe my success to, is his ability to motivate me and teach me to motivate myself, and that was essential. During the summers, I studied with Nathan Milstein, and that was an incredible experience. You know, Milstein he was always my favorite violinist, and I had every recording he ever made, and I listened to them incessantly. Though I was very, very close to his style and his facility is, I think, what I just was amazed by, just his lack of effort when he played, and the beauty of his sound and the purity of his sound. I loved it. So I got to study with him for 2 summers, and that was a revelation. You know, Milstein was very different than Mr. Gingold. Mr. Gingold was a man who inspired you by playing one phrase, and you'd drop over from the beauty of it, and he would inspire you by challenging you to meet your own highest standard. With Milstein, you know, he wasn't a great teacher in a sense. You had to watch what he did. If you were perceptive, and if you could watch and figure out how he did things and apply it, then he was a great teacher. But if you were somebody who needed guidance all the time, needed to be told how to do things, he was not the teacher for you. So with Milstein, I really kind of gathered a lot of information peripherally, watching him play, watch his posture, watch his facility, how he used his hands, and I accumulated all of that and started employing it in my own playing. Well, you know, Milstein was conductor baiter. He loved to bait conductors. I'll never forget one time he said to me, he said, "You know, conductor, they're so stupid. They only practice their symphonies." And you know, as kind of rude as that sounds, in a way it's true. I mean, there were so few conductors that knew how to accompany, how to collaborate with a soloist, how to be flexible, how to kind of almost mind read an interpretation. And Milstein had a point. Most conductors really were not very good at that. And now that I've done it, you know, a few thousand times, I understand what he's talking about. How you have a vision, or a kind of a, not only just an interpretation, but you have a vision of how the piece should go. And there are only a few conductors that I've played with that immediately grasp what you're trying to do. From the first note, they know what you want to do. And they shape it, and they support you, and they don't get in your way, and they actually help you achieve your ideas about the piece. And then not too many can do that. Today's conductors are not trained like in the old days. I mean, the Scholtis, the Ormondis, the Giolinis, the Toscaninis, they came from the pit. They came from the pit where they had to guide traffic, you know? They had an orchestra, acting, singing, choruses, off stage, stage direction, so much going on that they knew how to balance everything and how to move things along and how to keep an opera alive. And nowadays, most conductors don't have that experience, so therefore they have a chorus that's foreign to them, or they have a soloist that's foreign to them. They're just kind of out of whack. They're just not used to having the whole package. And you know, people like Lorin Maazel, I mean, he was a master. He was one of the few that came from the pit and could do everything spectacularly. And that's why I went to Pittsburgh, because I loved working with him. He was a master, and he knew what he was doing, and he knew a lot more than I did. And I loved learning from him. It was actually essential for me to return to orchestra playing. I had to have somebody in front of me that I really respected and that I felt I could learn from. I didn't want to just plateau. I didn't want to stay in one place. I wanted to move forward. I can tell you that what I do now, the only thing I don't do is what I ought to say, is I don't play concertmaster anymore. I mean, everything else I continue to do. I'm teaching at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm director of orchestral studies there, so I conduct the Philharmonic. I'm a guest soloist still with a lot of orchestras. I'm guest conducting a lot of orchestras. I'm playing a lot of chamber music with the Diaz Trio, with whom I've been playing now almost 20 years. I've got a piano trio with David DeVoe and Ann Martindale Williams. We play quite a bit. I'm just always on the go. There's always something. I'm commissioning new works, recording a lot. The recording has been a major focus for the last few years. I had a revelation, I guess, about 10 years ago, which was that I had postponed recording much of anything for many years because I had an aversion to it. I heard people who were 22, 23 years old record the Beethoven concerto, and I actually felt offended by it. I just thought, at 22 or 23, what possibly could you have to say about a concerto like that? I mean, what can you put down for posterity that says something about how you feel about the concerto? And so I made a conscious decision that I would not record anything until I felt I had a lot of miles on it and that I really had something to say, that I had really delved into it for a long period of time. And that time became, obvious about 10 years ago. And I thought, okay, now I can record the Brahms, I can record the Mendelssohn, I can record the Barber. I just recorded all the Schubert music recently, and that's coming out soon. Recorded all the Hindemith, all the Brahms sonatas. I'm just doing a lot of recording, and I feel now is the time for me to do it. I have a lot of very opinionated ideas about this music, and I've played it a lot, and I feel like now I actually have something to say about it that I think is worthy, and not necessarily to anybody else, but at least to me it is now. I had an agent for 30 years, and we had a wonderful relationship for many years, and we're still very good friends, and I love her dearly. But, to get concerts and things like that for an agent, it's a lot of work. You're competing with so many other people. If one starts to do a little bit of math, and you think of the big superstars, of which maybe there are 10 violin superstars, and you think about how many slots there are with each major orchestra, how many of them actually play every year with a major symphony, it leaves very little for everyone else. And that includes all instruments, not just violin. So I decided to do something different, which was to go out on my own. Lorin Maazel was the one who told me in the very beginning. He never had an agent. He said, they just don't do what you need them to do. He said, I do it myself. I do it through my connections. I do it through, he had an assistant that helped him, but he didn't have an agent. And so I decided to kind of follow his example now. And I've been doing it myself, and it's been actually very easy. Now with the web, you can have your bios, your photographs in high resolution, quotes, discography, thousands of links to YouTube or reviews or whatever, and you really now it's a little bit easier. And I've been around the block now for 40 years in this business, so it hasn't been a problem. In fact, I'm working harder now than I've ever worked in my life. So I think I've developed a lot of good relationships with a lot of people, and I think that has helped. You have to be a pretty nice person and responsible and prepared. And if you do that, and you build a good clientele of friends and people who respect you, you can make a very nice career. You got to find your own niche, though. You got to make sure you do what you do well. If you start getting into things that are not of your business, this is where I think people get sidetracked. They want to be the next, jazz violinist, but they want to play the Mendelssohn concerto. Well, unless you do both really well, it's hard to sell people on that. People don't buy it. And so I've been very fortunate because my new approach to it is working out very well. A few that I really do. I must say, perhaps I'd start by saying that being a violinist myself, I know how difficult it is. I know what it takes to be an excellent violin player, and I know what it takes to maintain a high standard. I know what it's like to travel, read your reviews, and deal with the public, and deal with the demands now. I mean, in the old days, you played your concert, you said hello to people who admired you and signed a few autographs. Now it's like, can you go to a school? Can you, speak to our board? Can you do a fundraising event? Can you play at this function? It's never just about your appearance anymore. So, that being said, the people that I really happen to like, but I wouldn't say that they're my, that they're any less good than anyone else. But I really like Frank Peter Zimmermann. He's not the most famous violinist in America, but I think he represents everything I love about violin playing. He's an elegant violin player. He's a mature artist. He's a really, really in-depth musician. I always love hearing him play. I've heard him play everything from Shostakovich to the Elgar Concerto to Beethoven Concerto. Everything I've ever heard him play, I've always enjoyed it and really admired it. Anna-Sophie Mutter is a very, very close friend of mine. There are things that she plays that I think are just unbelievable. Like the Berg Concerto. I think she created a new standard for that concerto that I don't think anybody comes close to playing. And there's certain repertoire that are associated with my favorite players. So I love Leonidas Kavakos too. He has an incredible bow arm that I admire. It's very unique. It's very different. And one reason I like it is because mine is also very different and unusual. And so I love Leonidas' playing, and there are a lot of other ones that I really, really like and admire. I tend to gravitate a little bit away from the breakdance type of violin players who move around a lot. They're not my cup of tea. It's just maybe it's generational with me. I like the Milstein style where you let the playing do the talking, and you do everything with ease and beauty and elegance. And so the people who move around a lot, generally, even if they play well, I'm not that attracted to that. And I actually, probably I admire and enjoy the playing mostly of other instrumentalists, not violin players so much. I mean, I have many more favorite pianists or singers or wind players than I do violin players, oddly enough. I mean, I have a lot of wonderful friends that pianist friends like Yefim Bronfman, Ian Hobson, and Emmanuel Axe. I mean, these guys, I just love their playing, and anytime I get to play with them, I'm thrilled to participate with them. I have some cellist friends. Andres Diaz and Williams are my two favorite cellists to play with. They're incredible players, incredible people. Roberto Diaz, of course, a great violist. Paul Coletti, a great violist. I play a lot with Menachem Pressler. That's out of this world. I love Pressler more than anything because he reminds me of my teacher. He's always pushing and trying to get the most out of you all the time, and he is not easy to please, and not everybody can take it, but I love every minute I'm with him. He challenges me all the time to do my very best, and some people don't like that. I don't care. I love that. I just enjoy every minute of that, and so I have a really incredibly rich cultural life, between my playing and knowing all these guys, and many of them are my friends, and playing such varied repertoire with all of them, and anybody who plays well and is an artist, you have to admire them, no matter what level or whether you like them or not. Bloody hell, it's hard. It's just hard. People don't realize how hard it is, but it's hard. It's hard work, and it's a tremendous commitment, and it could take a lot out of your life too. Many of my friends, I wouldn't say they suffer, but they have residuals from this life. Some of them, really can't get married and have a family because they travel so much. It's very difficult. Some of them, have health issues because of all the traveling, and some of them are allergic to different foods. It's hard for them to eat. if you go to China, it's not like you can go in and get a gluten-free, chunk of bread. It's not easy. And so it's a difficult lifestyle. And, at least in my case, I'm fortunate. I'm made of iron. I just don't get ill very easily. I don't worry about, I don't have allergies. I don't have all these issues that I have to deal with. I just, fortunately, just show up and play or conduct, and I'm done. So, Lorin Maazel hired me to be concertmaster, and it was really one of the great days of my life, because I did not want to play in an orchestra at that point. I had already played concertmaster for a year in San Diego and for 3 years in the Utah Symphony. And I decided after those 4 years that this just was not the life for me. There was labor trouble and other issues that I wasn't enjoying it. And I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go, I'll teach, I'll do my solo, I'll do my chamber music. So I went to the University of Michigan. I was teaching there for a couple of years. And then my manager told me that if I wanted to play with the Pittsburgh Symphony, I had to audition for Lorin Maazel. And I said, why? I've already won, second prize in the Tchaikovsky competition, and what more do you need nowadays? And she said, well, he won't hire you unless you go and play for him. I said, okay, fine. So I went to play for him. And so he said, sure, you can play. I'll have you play the Barber Concerto with the orchestra. I said, great. He said, well, we're looking for a concertmaster. Are you interested? I said, no, I'm not. He said, would you be willing to substitute for a couple of weeks? And I said, if it gets me a solo engagement, yeah, I'd be willing to do it. So I went and I played with him for 2 weeks. I really liked it. I thought he was great. Played the Barber. Then he asked me if I'd come back the next year and play like 8 weeks. I said, I don't know. Don't really want to. And then, he threw me a couple more bones, and pretty soon, I realized I really liked playing with him. And again, I learned so much from him, and he was so organized and brilliant and quirky, unusual. He always made me, again, he got the best out of me all the time. I liked that, I liked that somebody challenged me all the time. And we became very close, and he offered me the job, and I finally accepted it. And I thought, it'll last 4 or 5 years, I'll be out of here. But 20 years later, there I was. But after 20 years, it was enough. Jansons came to us as a dark horse. I think it was 1996 or 5, something like that. Maybe it was 97. And he had conducted us once. We were wowed by him. He did the Dvorak New World Symphony, and we thought it was great. We never heard of him. Nobody knew him. He was the conductor of the Oslo Philharmonic at the time, and he was very loyal to them. There was one thing that if you had to characterize Mariss Jansons, his sense of loyalty is incredible. He's an incredible musician and conductor, but he has an incredible sense of loyalty. You don't find that too often among conductors, because they're looking for the next big gig, for the next big position, the next big music directorship, and they covet Berlin or New York Philharmonic or whatever. Jansons had a hard time wanting to come to Pittsburgh because he was so loyal to the Oslo Philharmonic, and but we pried him away from there, fortunately, and he came, and it was a rocky road for a couple of years. We were not used to him, as opposed to Maazel, who controlled everything, every tempo, every nuance, every dynamic, everything. Maazel did it with the stick, with his hands. He did everything. In a way, the orchestra became very used to that and kind of almost dependent on the conductor. And Jansons was more vague and was more about color and gesture and kind of very inventive and spontaneous musician. Maazel had everything very well planned out and had a very specific interpretation. So when Jansons came to us, we were in this transition period. It took a couple years to get used to him, but once we got it, it was a whole different story. Because then we became a little bit freer, and we weren't as tight as we used to be in terms of an ensemble. But we were making music in a very different way, and people really loved it. I mean, our audiences loved it. They found themselves to be too clinical, and then Jansons was like, he was almost Italian in a way. It was all effusive gestures and passion, and not so much rigidity. We loved playing for him, and so we had a lot of success with him. We played all over the world with him, particularly in Vienna. They loved him there, and he has a close association with Vienna, and so we had a great time with him. It was a sad day when he decided to leave. Very interesting about Jansons. The most interesting thing to me about him is that he's Latvian by birth, and he has such a strong connection with Vienna that he almost comes across as a Austro-Germanic style that is not really that Russian-oriented in many ways. He does the Russian repertoire fabulously, but as we were talking about earlier, he could do Strauss waltzes, he could do Rosenkavalier, he could do that kind of repertoire. I mean, he had no peer when it came to this kind of repertoire. It was fascinating to see that, that a man could be that versatile in really what could be considered completely opposite kind of stylistic, well, it's not just stylistic, but really it's almost like a DNA-oriented thing. People who are from Vienna are proud of being from Vienna, or in that genre or in that tradition is almost at a cellular level, and they almost resent or don't accept anybody from the outside. They don't think that anybody can do it like they can do it. But Jansons is one of the few people that can come in there and they accept it, and he's a Latvian. Manfred Honeck is I think he's among truly the greatest musicians I've ever been around. Manfred is I guess the word is, he's a very intricate thinker. He thinks about every little tiny thing, and he tries to find music, or he tries to find meaning in everything all the time. When I played the Mozart Requiem with him, it was fascinating to see how he equated intervallic relationships with heaven and hell, for instance. Is there a God or is there not? And he could equate it just through intervallic analysis. And I found it so interesting. It never occurred to me. And he does this kind of thinking, and he really doesn't have a particular forte, because he does everything very, very well. His Dvorak symphonies are fabulous. His Strauss is fabulous. His Beethoven is fabulous. Mozart is fabulous. Schubert. He does all of this. The traditional Austro-German repertoire he does fabulously. But he also does a lot of other stuff fabulously. And that's unusual today. I think that's why so many orchestras really like him. They like his versatility. They like his intricate thinking. And he really takes a lot of care with everything. And he's a very calm and determined musician. I think people can misunderstand him and think he's just a nice, calm man. He is, but he's not in a certain way. He does not give up until he gets what he wants. And it means every detail is important to him. He'll do it in a calm, polite way, but boy, he's relentless. He just won't give up. I remember many times playing with him Mahler First Symphony. Every time we rehearsed, we played it 100 times with him. Every rehearsal, it was like a new piece to him. He was constantly, that should be a little shorter, take more time, breathe here, give us a little more stretch. And I'm thinking, come on, man, we've done this 100 times with you. He's never satisfied. I love that about him. It's such a gift. It's a gift to the musicians who play with him, because, you can get used to just playing the same thing over and over again. And you play with Manfred, it feels like a new piece every time you play it. It's great. That's his gift. He makes retreaded music. He makes it sound like it's brand new, like you've never heard it that way. it's so fresh, it's so unusual. There are so few artists that do that, you know? I mean, the first one that comes to mind is Maniacs. Manny takes your well-worn Mozart concerto or Schumann concerto or, you know, Brahms B-flat, and every time I hear him play, it sounds like, gosh, I never heard it so beautifully, so fresh, so elegant, so full of life, you know? And he works very hard at it. I remember one time we were doing the B-flat, I forget which number it is, and he was working, and I said to him, I said, Manny, I love the way you play that last one. What is it? It sounds so elegant and fresh. And he said, man, I got to work on just the way I hit the key here, and you got to come off the key like this. And he showed me how he was working on it. He said, it's so hard to do it. He said, but I got to keep trying to get that to work that way. And I thought, boy, here's a guy who's probably played it 100 times, and he's a great pianist. He could kind of let it go a little bit, couldn't he? No, he wouldn't. I love people like that. You know, Manny's the kind of guy who has developed a career not only on his superb piano playing, but he's truly such a nice person and a humble person that everybody loves to be around him. Everybody enjoys his presence. We always have a good time. And Manny, you know, he'll often come in and he'll fret over how he's playing, you know, all the time he's always fretting. And we find that so, you know, really endearing in a way. You know, he's not full of himself. He's still working as an artist. And I mean, God, I can't emphasize enough how rare that is, that people who take their art and their performing so seriously, and they're humble and they're always looking for something more. I think it's really great. You know, concertmaster has evolved for many, many years. In the old days, it was called leader. And before there were conductors, the concertmaster was the boss, sort of. You know, as time went by, concertmaster's duties changed from kind of being the conductor leader to just being the leader, and then went to now being a member of an orchestra with a slightly elevated title. Being a concertmaster is a complicated job, and it doesn't really have a definition in many ways. There are things that we have in common, which is, you know, tuning the orchestra, preparing the bowings, being the face of the orchestra in many ways, helping with fundraising today, performing a concerto usually every year. But there are many other intangible things that involve leadership, you know, which you could equate with, you know, any sports team or, you know, CEO or something, where you set a certain standard or a certain department or perhaps a certain style to the orchestra. You know, one of the things that was very important to me was to be as prepared as possible, number one, and number two, to always show up really early. You know, to me it was important to show everybody that I mean business when I come to play. And so I'd be there an hour before every rehearsal, and there were only two other people in the orchestra who were there, who were equally as tough as I was, and that was our first trumpet player, George Vosberg, and our timpani player, Tim Adams. The three of us, it was like clockwork. An hour before the rehearsal, we were already there, warming up, getting ready to go. It just sends a message about what you would expect from your peers and how you want the place to be run. And it was irrelevant to me who was conducting. It was a matter of, you know, we're an orchestra. The guy in front of us, in many ways, is secondary. You know, our own identity and our own level of playing and our own definition of who we are, our own identity, is wrapped up in how we play, not what the conductor asks you to do. So, you know, every concertmaster is different, and every orchestra is different. So you've got to get your finger on the pulse of the orchestra too. You know, I think there are some misfit situations. There was an orchestra that I had thought about playing with, and I went to hear them, And I actually played for the conductor, and then I withdrew my name because I just thought, you know what? I don't think this is going to work with me and them. I don't see our personalities being workable. And well, I'll start with a couple of funny ones. I remember one time we were playing Tannhäuser without words. It was an arrangement by Lorin Maazel. And at the very end of the piece, he had developed some kind of computerized thing where the organ would play these triplets, dot, 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 and it made like an unusual noise, like a wow, 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 wow. It's a kind of electronic thing that he added to it at the very end. So we rehearsed it, and it was all fine. It was unusual. Okay, fine. So we get to the concert, and Maazel gives the cue, and nothing happens. And he gives the cue again, and nothing happens. And I'm thinking, uh-oh. And I look back there, and I see the organ player. She's pulling stops and throwing her hands around, and Maazel's like, come on, nothing. And then, you could just see he's furious. He's like, conducting, finally, nothing. Well, this goes on for the whole passage. And finally, Maazel, you could just see he's just resigned. He's very upset. Okay, so we all wonder what the heck happened. 20 years later, I am involved in honoring Maazel for a Lifetime Achievement Award in New York at the Bohemian Club. And I played at it, and I was organizing it for them because I didn't know him, and I knew him very well. So we were sitting on the dais together, and I had just talked to a viola player in the orchestra, and I had mentioned to him I was going to see Maazel, and he said, you remember what happened with that Tannhäuser? I said, how could I forget? He said, well, guess what? That was me. I screwed it up. I said, what? He said he was walking around backstage an hour before the concert, and he tripped over a wire. And he pulled the wire out of the wall, and he saw it was to the organ. So he thought, okay. And he just plugged it back in. He didn't think anything of it. He said, but during the concert, when that didn't happen, he was wondering, God, why isn't that working? And then he started to realize that thing was hooked to a computer. And they had to reboot the computer for that to work. But since the plug came out, nobody had thought of that, and he hadn't told anybody. So he finally said to me, I haven't told anybody this for 20 years. But I was the one who screwed that up. So I'm sitting with Maazel, and I said, Maestro, I said, you remember what happened there? He says, how could I forget? And I could tell he was a little annoyed. And I said, well, guess what? I found out what happened. He says, oh, do tell. So I told him, and he looked very serious. He did not look amused. And I said, well, a viola player, I didn't say who, I was a viola player, tripped over the wire, and pulled it out and put it back in, and that's what happened. And he said, oh. And he turned around and he kept on eating, and I thought, oh, jeez, I shouldn't have told him. He's still mad about it. Suddenly, he drops his fork and he looks over at me and he says, figures it was a viola player. So finally, I got a little bit of it, a little taste of him giving into it. We've had all kinds of things happen where conductors have gotten completely lost. And I remember one time we were playing Concerto in F, and our soloist, by Gershwin, and our soloist had a massive memory slip. And she was playing, and the conductor had no idea what to do. And he was conducting, and he just kind of stopped, and the orchestra stopped, and she was fumbling around. And suddenly, she went, dun, 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 and she repeated it twice, and I said, I know where she is. So as soon as she played that passage, I came in all by myself. Trun, 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 all by myself. The whole orchestra hadn't played a note. So I came in, and the conductor looked down at me like, how did you know? So he didn't conduct for another 3 bars. He was in such shock. And the orchestra started to figure it out. So afterwards, he came to me, and he said, okay, all I got to say is, whatever they're paying you, it was worth it. He said, I don't know how you got me out of that. He said, but you figured it out, and I couldn't. He said, I had no idea where she was. That's an example of a guy who really didn't know the piece that well. He should have known it a lot better. So we have, both ends of the spectrum. We have, incredible conductors. We have people who, who are supposed to be conductors that really don't know the pieces that well, and you depend on other people to try to bail you out. We had many great concerts. I mean, I remember a lot of great Mahler symphonies we did with Jansons, with Maazel. In particular, some things that we did with Maazel, Miraculous Mandarin of Bartok. I mean, he ate that thing for lunch. It was just incredible the way he did that piece. And Firebird Suite with Jansons, fabulous. Mahler 5 with Jansons, fabulous. L'Enfant les Sortilèges of Ravel with Maazel, incredible, just incredible. And we had a lot of other wonderful conductors come and go, and we did Bartok Divertimento with Dochnani, Dvorak 8 with Dochnani, absolutely fabulous. He was one of my all-time favorite conductors. Dochnani, interestingly enough, reminded me very much of stories that my teacher told me about Zell. And one thing he said about Zell was that Zell always left his best performances at the dress rehearsal. And, he would just work and work and work and get everything so finely tuned, and he'd exhaust the players by the time they got to the dress rehearsal. They played everything they could, then the concert was a notch lower. And Dochnani tended to do that a little bit. Like, he'd push us and he'd get us to play so well. But we worked so hard. He's the only guy I ever played with that gave me a little bit of arm trouble, where my arms started to get tired, and I was worried about getting tendonitis or something. He worked us so hard. We got great results, but the first couple of concerts were always a little bit below what we could have done because we were just overworked. But he's a brilliant conductor. I always loved playing with him, and I love Tortelier, Jean-Pascal Tortelier. A very good friend. We did a wonderful works by Dutilleux with him. He has great ears, just fabulous ears. There's a piece by Dutilleux, I can't remember the name of it, and we did some wonderful Hindemith that nobody ever plays. He did it brilliantly. Did a Scheherazade with him that was wonderful. Wonderful colorist. We did a Harianos suite by Kodai, which is rarely played nowadays. Beautiful with him, just great. He has a great sense of color and balance, and he makes people do unusual things with their instruments, and it was really great. We did a wonderful, the best Franck D minor symphony ever was with Tortelier. Wonderful. That's a deadly piece. It was done very poorly by almost everyone. He did it brilliantly. He actually made that piece a great work. We've had some unusual things happen with conductors and soloists. I remember, I'm not going to say who the pianist was, but he came and played, and we were going to go on tour with him, and he played miserably. Tchaikovsky first piano concerto. It was miserable, and Maazel was conducting, and I was like, well, I know him, he'll fire him, but he didn't. He kept him on, and we were going on tour, and we played a couple of smaller concerts, one in Allentown or Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, or somewhere in New Jersey or something, and we're all going, you're not going to fire him. I don't believe we're going to play Carnegie Hall with this guy. So we get to Carnegie Hall in the morning. Maazel comes up on the podium and he says, our soloist unfortunately had a run-in with a taxi door this morning and hurt his hand, and so we now have Horacio Gutierrez has kindly stepped in at the last minute to play Tchaikovsky. Of course, we all started roaring, laughing, because we thought, how stupid could we be to think that he wasn't going to wasn't going to fire him. Of course, he was going to fire him. He just waited, and he probably told Horacio a few days before, get ready because I'm going to need you in Carnegie Hall. He just let the guy play the lesser concerts and try not to embarrass him or whatever. So I love that about Maazel. We also had another incident that was incredible. We do Beethoven 9, and we get to the quartet, where the singers are singing. Soprano opens her mouth, and I could read Maazel from a mile away. She opens her mouth, he takes one look at her, and I turned to my stand partner, I said, she's gone, she's done. And the quartet finished, they rehearsed a little bit, Maazel said, let's call a break. I said to Mark, she's done. Okay, so after the break, we come out, there's another soprano there, already. So he suspected, obviously. He had somebody ready. We rehearse. She opens her mouth. He turns and looks at her. And I thought, no, it can't be. All right. So the next day we rehearse again. A third soprano is there. We rehearse. And by God, he looked at her again. Looked at the third soprano. Looked at her. And I said to Mark, I said, I don't believe this. Let's see what happens tonight. Sure enough, it was a fourth soprano. He fired 3 sopranos in 24 hours. You know, that takes some serious guts, and it also shows what kind of standards he expected, you know. And even we, not being experts in the voice, we knew that they were not really top flight, first-rate singers, the first 3. I don't remember who the fourth one was. I think she was a Russian soprano. She did it brilliantly that night. We all understand, too, that part is a very unforgiving soprano part, and that Beethoven did not write well for voice. We all understood that, but that's not the point. You know, the point is you got to have somebody really good that can handle the part. And sure enough, that night there was a fourth soprano. It's incredible, huh? I mean, how many people would do that? You know, most conductors probably would try to be nice and work with the soprano or try to help them, or if they're not in good voice, they find an understudy, a substitute. But to get 4 sopranos, and this woman apparently flew in from New York for the concert just in time with no rehearsal, mind you. So somebody he obviously knew that he knew he could count on.
Violinist Andres Cardenes, professor at Carnegie Mellon University, world-renowned violinist, and I know a listener of classical QED. Thank you for coming to help us celebrate our 40th anniversary.
Thank you, Ted.
Wonderful.
Great to be with you, and happy anniversary.
Well, tell us a little bit about what the station does in your life. You know, we're playing the music. We never really know who's listening, and it's such an honor to have musicians listen to this station.
Well, it's part of my daily life. I can't live without it, actually. Every morning I wake up and the first thing I do is put on QED, and I listen to all the great artists and the great music that you always program, and of course the great announcers, and I really enjoy the time that I have every day with QED. It's an essential part of my daily cultural life, and even though I play music for a living and I play an awful lot of music, I still can't ever get enough, and it's very important to me to have QED in my life every day so that I can hear different kinds of music and listen also just to the performances, because you know I perform myself and I have other performers playing around me, but actually be able to sit down quietly and listen to a performance of somebody doing something is really enlightening and very inspiring.
Well, we love to hear performances by you and by Luz Manriquez, and love to have another album from you one of these days.
We're working on it.
Andres Cardenes and Luz Manriquez.